there was a 293 million decrease to disaster mitigation funding. People are using drones, they're using robots for disaster prevention, they're using it for disaster response. You start decreasing that funding, what does that look like? How does that impact the drone industry? These are rhetorical questions, but $0 for California wildfire and North Carolina hurricane relief effort. What?
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 439. How does the 2025 continuing resolution passed by Congress impact the drone industry? For that question, we head to Denver to speak with Dawn Zoldi, CEO and founder of P3 Tech Consulting and publisher of Autonomy Global. P3 Tech is an internationally recognized company that provides consulting, content, and education on emerging technologies, with a special focus on legal and regulatory issues in autonomous systems. The company is best known for its award-winning Dawn of Autonomy podcast, formerly Dawn of Drones, and its global media platform, Autonomy Global, which connects people passionate about advanced tech policy with the programs and insights they need to succeed. Dawn is a licensed attorney and retired U.S. Air Force colonel with 28 years of military and federal service. She's also a Part 107 certified drone pilot and an internationally recognized expert in uncrewed aircraft system law and policy. Her work has been featured on Fox News, CNN, Forbes, Newsweek, and PBS. Her Dawn of Autonomy podcast was named one of the top 7 drone podcasts of 2024 by The Drone Girl and Best Drone Podcast of the Year in 2023 by The Droning Company. She is also the author of Unmanned Aircraft Systems Legal and Business Considerations, a modern primer for U.S. drone programs. In early 2025, Congress passed a continuing resolution to keep the U.S. government funded. But what does that mean for the drone industry? In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Dawn breaks it down, especially for companies working in autonomy, robotics, drones, and AI technologies for defense. She also shares updates on her Law Tech Connect workshop and the latest from Autonomy Global. But before we hear from Dawn, I want to stress that your support is the heartbeat of my podcast. Every episode is crafted with you in mind, and your generous donations ensure I can keep delivering the content you love. Whether it's the price of a coffee or a more substantial contribution, every bit helps to defray the cost of production. Donate today and be a vital part of the podcast's continued journey to greatness. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And if you can, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and leave a nice review and rating. It really helps improve the podcast ranking among the many thousands of active podcasts today. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn what the recently passed continuing resolution means for the drone industry with Dawn Zoldi of P3 Tech Consulting. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Dawn to introduce herself.
Okay, hey everybody, Dawn Zoldi here. I am the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and now also the publisher at Autonomy Global.
Dawn, tell us about P3 Tech and Autonomy Global.
P3 Tech has 3 components to it. Basically, we do consulting, content creation, which probably most people know us from, and then also education in emerging technologies. On the content creation side, I've got multiple podcasts, including the Dawn of Autonomy weekly podcast, formerly the Dawn of Drones, And on the educational side, we do the annual Law Tech Connect workshop. Autonomy Global falls under that content creation. It's a new global digital media website and with 15 language plugins.
When did you start Autonomy Global?
So we rebranded to Dawn of Autonomy last year for the podcast, and it's been going great. And then we launched Autonomy Global on January 1st of this year.
So today we want to talk about the continuing resolution that was recently passed by Congress to fund the government. I know you've had some experience with continuing resolutions in the past. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Randy. And just kind of context also, I'm a retired Air Force colonel, and I lived the dream of many, many CRs along the way, especially when I was at the Air Force Academy. I mean, every time there's a continuing resolution, which basically means Congress isn't actually appropriating a no kidding appropriations bill. They're just temporarily funding the government, with this threat of shutdown. There's always thrash, right? Like, you have to figure out who your mission essential employees are and who's going home and who isn't. And it's really not a great situation. And then in terms of the contracting arena, what it means for people is there's kind of no guarantee, right? That money's going to come down. So for this particular one, and this was just recently passed, what it did was temporarily fund the government, but for the defense side, right, at fiscal year 2024 levels.
Is that a reduction?
Basically, what it means is there's no increase, right? But, there's inflation, things get more expensive. And actually, we've been seeing that, of course, across the globe lately. So to maintain something at a previous year's level is not an ideal situation for programs that continually have to deal with inflation and rising costs. And we see that on the commercial side too, with the additional influx of, or the goal to, include commercial technologies more increasingly on the defense side. So, what a CR also does, again, this is just kind of very high level. It limits the ability to scale production and modernize certain programs. That can affect readiness for the defense and also, kind of set you back in terms of defense priorities that continue to evolve. Now, when it comes to the drone industry specifically, or let's just say robotics and autonomy, let's throw AI in there. Honestly, it's a little bit all over the map here. One of the big things that I think is important to foot stomp on this continuing resolution is that it outright says there will be no new program starts during this continuing resolution. So what does that mean? So you're not bringing in something new necessarily. Now, they made exceptions for this. And what they said was, hey, if it was in the National Defense Authorization Act, if we listed things in there, then they should be good to go.
Even if it hadn't started or hadn't actually drawn any money, it still thought that it could move forward?
I think that's kind of the idea, right? That we said we were going to do this, so we're going to continue on that path. So there is some good news in there, I think, in terms of UAS and counter UAS systems. We saw some bills, both from the House and the Senate, that are looking to enhance those kinds of capabilities. I mean, all you have to do is look out on the modern battlefield in Ukraine, Russia, and you'll see that, they're calling it the first real drone war, right? So to not be able to have a new program start in that space would be kind of insanity right now and would definitely set us back. So it seems like we're on a good path there. When it comes to autonomous ground systems, there were also some bills that related to that for research and development of those systems. For example, autonomous trucks or autonomous vehicles and robotic logistics and things like this. We're seeing Israel do a ton of stuff in this space. So that's kind of cool. And then last but not least, artificial intelligence for autonomous systems is something that people are looking closely at and were also mentioned in those previous bills. So there's some areas that are ripe for development in those spaces.
Are these initiatives building on past work, or are they bold new steps to help the defense or the drone industry keep up with global changes?
Well, they're definitely designed to keep up with what's happening in the world, to be sure. And by definition, a new program start is like something new that they don't currently have as a program of record. So, in those three areas, I think we could see some growth. But, Randy, the reality is there's just a lot of churn right now, right? I mean, all you have to do is doesn't matter what news outlet you're, looking at. It's clear that there's a lot of activity from the White House in terms of scaling back the federal government, scaling back regulations, what's happening to various employees. And so you add that churn to this continuing resolution situation, and it's just not ideal, right? People, I think, in the drone industry oftentimes will look at the DoD or Department of Defense. It's like the cash cow. If I can only get a defense contract, they might think, then we're set in stone. But I don't know that that is so certain anymore. I think people really need to focus on the problem sets they're trying to solve in the commercial side, who those clients are, and how they can have success without having to rely on grant money or SIBR, right, the Small Business Innovation Research Award type money. So it's just kind of an interesting time right now.
With all the uncertainty around legislation and funding, how is it affecting the various sectors of the drone industry?
This continuing resolution did some things, let's just call it on the civil side, that has, I think, ripple effects into the drone industry and the defense industry and robotics and autonomy. So, for example, there was a 293 million decrease to disaster mitigation funding. Okay. So what does that mean? You look, as well as I do, because you're an expert in this space just as much as anybody, Randy. People are using drones, they're using robots for disaster prevention, they're using it for disaster response. You start decreasing that funding, what does that look like? How does that impact the drone industry? These are rhetorical questions, but you know, $0 for California wildfire and North Carolina hurricane relief efforts. What? Question mark. And then you think of our buddies at NIST that are the standards bearers, if you will. And I was just at Drone Responders National Public Safety UAS conference recently, right? They have their whole, public safety line of effort and the training that they do. Well, they've knocked back construction of facilities funding in half for NIST facilities. They reduced their scientific and technical research funding from 1 billion to 857 million. And then let's just throw into the pile $13 billion in congressional earmarks that have been eliminated. Now, what those were and to go through those line by line, you'd have to, that would take a while, but surely there's something in there that's going to impact the industry. So because the civil or the commercial side is really so much more symbiotic, I'll call it, with the defense industry right now, any impacts to either side is going to impact both sides.
There's been talk about using drones for border security. Does the continuing resolution affect those efforts?
For border patrol or border operations in particular, I don't actually know. But what I will say is there is clearly a push for faster deployment of AI-enabled not only drone technology, but counter drone technology, because, as Randy, on the border, they're launching drones over, sometimes with drugs on them, sometimes just to surveil what our guys are doing, things like that. So I think you'll see some movement in that space. If you're tracking the Defense Innovation Unit as an example, and their blue UAS list, they've really done a huge refresh on that lately, not just on the hardware side, but now there's this, kind of software effort. And so, I think you're going to continue to see that. It's just a matter of, how many seats are there at the table, right? That's just a great question to ask. I wouldn't assume it's an endless buffet. And not that it ever was. I think people had this incorrect notion that it was. It never has been, but definitely it is not now. And So with that refresh in particular, DIU, that's done. You'd have to kind of wait for another solicitation to get a shot at getting on that list. And what does that look like? DIU is not necessarily being leveraged by the border, Customs and Border, which is DHS. DIU is for DoD, but other federal agencies do tend to tap into, that GSA list once it's approved.
Wasn't there drone defense funding earmarked for the Marine Corps? Is that now at risk?
So Anduril has been scoring contracts right, left, and sideways. It seems every time I turn around, Anduril's got something else going on with the DoD. So good for them. But they had a contract for AI-enabled drone defense systems. The question now is like, is this going to slow it down? With this continuing resolution, they're opening up a big facility in Ohio. They're looking to hire a whole bunch of people. So, it'll be interesting to watch how this goes.
What about other areas like autonomous vehicles? Have they been affected too?
The Army had this ATVS, an autonomous logistics truck program, on tap. I think there's some uncertainties, at least in time, in terms of the timelines to field these vehicles. By the way, fun fact, I just had a contribution from, I'm going to say, Ari Gozi, I think is his name. He's an Israeli journalist. Just did a great article about these autonomous logistics vehicles they're using in Israel. So that's on our site for Autonomy Global. I think it's still on the front page. So I think the vision is very similar for our Army in terms of what that truck might do and look like.
What sort of impacts do you see in the areas of AI and machine learning?
Potentially some integration challenges of integrating AI into defense systems. And these, as we know, are critical in enhancing autonomous capabilities. I want to give a plug here. There's a company called Caresoft. They do exclusively work in the government space. And Lacey Ween she heads up a lot of things there, but definitely the autonomy and robotics line of effort. And she was on our Dawn of Autonomy back in actually the very first show of the year, where she looked ahead to 2025, looking back at the National Defense Authorization Act and some of these other things that passed at the end of last year. So it's kind of interesting to go back and watch that and then see, all right, how is that going to be affected by this CR? How are all of those things going to be affected by this CR? So I think a lot more to follow, but it's definitely injected some uncertainty into the process.
How should people be preparing for the changes ahead? Where are the opportunities?
I've been talking about this for a while. I think the companies that are going to survive are the ones that are using open systems architectures that are able to plug and play with other technologies. I mean, I just actually did an interview with Lockheed Martin about the F-22. I mean, look, the military, that's the direction they're going. But it's not just the military, it's the civilian and the commercial side too. So what I would recommend to companies is they're kind of facing this uncertainty is, focus on building strategic partnerships with each other and then with defense agencies. Like, to the extent that you can bring forward a holistic solution, I think it's much better than just like a little sliver of the pie. And of course, never stop innovating, right? I mean, in any given company, just kind of keeping up with the threat environment or with the needs that are out there, that's the key. How many times, and you've probably seen this yourself, Randy, where a company is out there and they've created this product and then they're like they've created a solution in search of a problem. Like, look at what the real problems are out there and like aim to solve those, right? Because then you actually have a market, somebody that needs or wants the product or whatever it is you're making. And, I think in terms of future budgets, advocacy is key. We've seen great work, I'd say, in the drone industry from the Commercial Drone Alliance, from, AUVSI. I'm very hopeful, Randy. I've got my fingers crossed that we might see a quote unquote Part 108 rule I just heard that, or I read, I think, in Breaking Defense, that the Secretary of Transportation, Duffy, he visited the Amazon facility and said, rule coming soon. I mean, this was just like literally like last Friday or something. So, um, but the point is keep advocating, keep lobbying, make your way up to the hill, if you have that opportunity. And then for the people that actually have money that are looking to invest, I'd say continue investing in emerging technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence, drone swarms, counter drone technology. All these things are going to be critical to defense strategies.
How can people stay current with what's happening? What upcoming seminars or resources can they tap into?
We'll do our Law Tech Connect workshop again this year with Exponential in Houston. It's going to occur on Monday, May 19th. And our very first panel of the day are basically how to land government contracts. So we've got amazing people on this panel. We've got attorneys. We've got, Casey Ocaña from AVSI who leads, the green UAS program and how that's a pipeline into blue. We've got, for example, Tom Sawyer from Grand Sky in North Dakota just landed a multi-year deal with the DoD called Project Ultra, which is kind of a logistics and UAS traffic management project where they're going to be flying cargo basically from Grand Forks Air Force Base out to a space station in the National Airspace System, dropping that stuff off and bringing it back. So hearing from attorneys in the space, from companies and organizations that have navigated these waters, and the practical tips that they're going to provide, I think is going to be really beneficial to anybody looking to work in this space.
When is your next Law Tech Connect seminar?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be on Monday, May 19th in Houston, Texas, in conjunction with AUVSI Exponential. For anybody considering coming, I'd say make your flight as early as possible on Sunday, the 18th. We'll kick it off with a networking social hour Sunday evening at the Social Beer Garden in Houston from 7 to 9. That way you can meet, these faculty experts the night before they even take the stage on Monday. And then as part of the registration, you also get the 3-day expo hall pass. So once the main event kicks off on Tuesday, you can run around the expo hall for essentially for free. So it's basically a full week of activities. And like I said, our very first panel will kick this off with focused on government contracts and what's happening in this particular arena.
We've covered a lot. Is there anything that we missed that you think we should touch upon?
I just say, just be eyes wide open, practical in your approach. Keep reading. I mean, you can read the CR yourself. I mean, it's kind of great bedtime reading because I'm sure it'll put you to sleep. But Carasoft has webinars on these topics. There are experts in this space. Come to Law Tech Connect. Just keep yourself educated. Don't fly blind. I mean, let's use the drone terminology. Don't fly blind. Because we're in kind of an interesting situation domestically and then globally as well. And it's going to be an interesting time, I think, for the industry. But I also believe strongly that the drone industry is one that is resilient and will survive even turbulence. And the companies that are going to come out on top are the ones that work and play well with others. And so we'll see what happens. We'll keep an eye on it this year.
And for my final question, Dawn, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
The future of the drone industry, like I said, I think I do like to believe it is bright. Let's face it, Randy, in reality, I am glass half empty kind of gal. So I'm trying to be positive here. I think with a Part 108 Notice of Public Rulemaking, if that's really in the close-in horizon, that's huge. There are still opportunities out there. There are 100% needs out there in society for everything that drones bring to the table. We see this, especially in the public safety space, in the healthcare space. And so my message to the industry is keep plugging away. A lot of people have been at it for a while and some are starting to get weary. I'd say don't give up. I think the future at the end of the day is bright. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. and it's not a Mack truck.
That's it for episode 439 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Dawn Zoldi of P3 Tech Consulting and Autonomy Global. I want to thank Dawn for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about P3 Tech or Autonomy Global, or want to connect with Dawn, check out the web pages at p3techconsulting.com or autonomyglobal.co. If you like the Drone Radio Show, then please subscribe and share, write a glowing review, and if you're able, donate to keep the podcast going. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.